basically in there, George Payton said, he's going to hit the market, which means that they're not going to franchise tag him and that other teams are going to have the chance to make an offer for Dre'Mont Jones, which I want to keep in mind here. Keep an eye, because of ties. Like, he was not very happy that Giro Evero left, but keep an eye on the Carolina Panthers as a team if they really want to come in. I don't know what I think a lot of their stuff has to be on the offensive side of the ball. I think they have a really damn good defense. He could go to there. He could also go to Miami, reunite with Bradley Chubb, who he's very close with, who he was very upset. Like, he understands it's a business, but when Bradley Chubb was traded by the Broncos and George Payton called him a core player, he also called Draymond a core player. He saw that George Payton traded a core player away. Though in Bradley Chubb's situation, he's on an expiring deal, and if you don't extend him, you risk losing him in free agency as well. So, why not try to get something if you know that you may not bring him back on free agency or, another team's going to come in and pay him. So for Draymond, it's kind of the same situation here. Keep an eye on the Panthers and the Dolphins because of the previous ties to Evero and to Fangio and maybe where he ends up going there. I think that they're going to look at a lot of things there. I think that the Dolphins' offense, we can make the argument, they're pretty damn good.
Yeah.
But you add Dre'Mont Jones to that defensive line, opposite of Jalen Phillips, opposite of Bradley Chubb. That's a pretty damn good defensive line with Fangio's style, the way he plays. Could be a reunion there if, in fact, they want to pay him that. But the Broncos will continue to negotiate, and George Payton did say talks with his agent, Kyle McCarthy, have been very positive.
Interesting thought from our pal, friend of the station, Mario Vatenza. He throws that on Twitter. And I want to get Vatenzi, excuse me. I want to get a couple thoughts out there. He says, in my opinion, Broncos not tagging Dre'Mont Jones is a high-risk he says Broncos not tagging Dre'Mont Jones is a high-risk negotiation tactic to get in his good graces. He's mad about Chubb and Evero no longer being around, and if Denver tags him, it's just another decision that upsets him because players hate being on the tag.
Players don't like that.
So I actually think there could be some validity to that. And I do think that the Broncos, at the end of the day, would like to bring back Dre'Mont Jones. It's just a matter of can they, find a middle ground between what he wants and what they want to pay him. We'll see how that shakes out. But what do you make of, maybe not giving him the tag to try to keep him in your good graces to try to negotiate a long-term deal?
Yeah, I mean, Draymond wanted an extension done during the season last year, right? You've seen it happen before. Like last year, not last year, but 2 years ago, George Payton extended Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick in season. And, for a guy like Dre'Mont Jones, it's like you want to maybe have that kind of assurance because Draymond as well, like during this whole time period last season, was their best defensive player. You can make an argument on the defensive side of the ball with Chubb, before he got traded, but like 6.5 sacks for him. Talk about 16 to 18 quarterback pressures. Just his impact was there. He had a career year in terms of tackles and just impact. Like he's a guy that when you turn on the tape and people are like, well, the Broncos didn't win much, just let him walk. Like you cannot, and I think Mario also made a great point on Twitter. I think he was talking to somebody. You can't win games without your best players. Like it's hard. It's hard to win NFL games if you're just constantly letting your best players go. Draymond is one of their best players, and they're better with him. They're going to win more games because of Draymond having him on the roster than they are, in my opinion, trying to substitute his production with two other guys. They're going to be second-year players, Matt Henningsen and Inyoma Uwazurike, who have talent, have promise to them, but you got to continue to develop those guys. It's asinine and foolish to think that those guys are going to step in and have the type of production that Draymond has had. You can't replace that production that he's had. So you have to find a way to keep him there. And look, this is the risk you run. You risk losing him entirely because there may be a team, if it's about money and it's also a better fit for Draymond, I mean, who are you to say no? It's like you want to make sure you're taking care of financially, but you also want to make sure you're going to a place where you're valued and you're going to play a massive role.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I want to bring up a point, and I'm going to give him credit because he's the one who put it in my ear. Eric Goodman and I were chatting on the phone earlier today, and I actually think it's a good analogy. He compared what the Broncos have been doing over the last couple of years to a game of Jenga in regards to their pass rushers and defensive linemen. You pull Von Miller out, okay, tower's still standing. You pull Bradley Chubb out, okay, you're doing all right, a little bit of instability. If you lose Dre'Mont Jones, what does the Denver Broncos pass rushing group look like moving forward? And we know that, George Payton has done a good job on hitting in guys later in the draft, Dre'Mont Jones being another example of that. But I do kind of understand where Eric's coming from, and I agree with him.
He didn't draft him, though.
True.
But he drafted Baron Brown and Quinn Miners.
It's one of those, though, where I wonder how many times can you remove these plus players, Vaughn, Chubb, Jones, and continue to have this plus-level defense?
You're playing with fire, right? And you and I have talked about it. I talked about it on the show, especially like covering the team this year. Denver went up against some teams this year. Like I look at guys like Max Crosby, and I'm like, man, Denver doesn't have a guy like that on the outside of defensive end or even at pass rusher yet, right? Like that was going to be Randy Gregory. Randy Gregory was on injured reserve due to being injured. Baron Browning is a guy that's still developing, but
Swiss
has all
Army
the talent.
But like, look at Baron Browning, raw player. Still trying to kind of come within
That's
his
why.
own.
That's why I think that Sean Payton, with him and the staff that he's put together, and for George Payton philosophically, player development is huge for these guys, and you have to buy into that. Like, a lot of teams have this approach where it's like, oh, we're just going to throw a price tag on it in free agency. We're going to take this guy here, but you have to be methodical. And like, some NFL teams are bad at drafting. I think George Payton's pretty solid at drafting. I think his first 2 draft classes have been pretty damn good. Now, there's this recency bias against George Payton because he hired Nathaniel Hackett and so on and so forth. This past season was a disaster. We can acknowledge that, yeah, that was probably an area where Payton messed up, but that doesn't mean that everything that he's done has been bad for Denver. I think he's put Denver in far better position than maybe they would have been with somebody else's GM.
I agree with you. It makes me wonder, because Dre'Mont Jones is a very good player, and has a lot of upside in this league. And, we talk about how Baron Browning's still a little bit of a raw guy. Randy Gregory, a year older, injury history to an extent, right? You don't really have many people that you can fall back on at those positions. And obviously, we know that getting pressure on the quarterback, is absolutely essential in kind of disrupting, opponents' offenses. I mean, as great as your secondary could be with Justin Simmons and others, you can't just rely on them to play lockdown defense and continue to put up the numbers that the defense has put up over the last few years if you can't continue to generate that pass rush. And I just looked to Vaughn, I looked at Chubb, and I looked at Dre'Mont, and if you have all 3 of those guys out of the organization in essentially a 2.5-year span, what's left?
You got a lot of young guys and a lot of question marks as it pertains to, like, the health department. It's like Randy Gregory, in my opinion, going back and just watching last year's tape, watching him, man, he is fantastic. When healthy, he is probably their best pass rusher, and you can make an argument maybe their best defensive player for an aspect of getting after the quarterback. They missed him a lot last year, and yeah, when you trade away a guy like Bradley Chubb, who's having a lot of success in Denver, I also think having like DJ Jones, Dre'Mont Jones, I think it made those guys on the outside's job so much easier because these guys are creating pressure on the interior, which is leaving more one-on-one isolated matchups on the outside with, offensive tackles where it's like, hey, win your one-on-one. That's where Denver had an advantage. And when some of those guys were removed from the lineup, you can see where Denver struggled. And it's something Sean Payton sees. It's something that George Payton himself sees. But think about it as well. Denver has so many needs this season, and George Payton even mentioned it today. He said the offensive line, we need to rebuild the offensive line. That's going to cost money, and that's going to be a pricey option. So it's like where Denver's at, because a lot of their money the last handful of years has been pretty much dedicated to the defensive side of the ball. It's going to be a little bit of a shift, and you run the risk of losing out on a good guy like Dre'Mont Jones if it means that you're going to have a better offensive line, which, playing devil's advocate, Denver does need that. But that's where you have to hope that you have a good system in place where you can develop players that can maybe substitute and, fulfill production. It's going to be a by-committee approach if they lose Dre'Mont Jones. I don't think Denver's going to find a guy. I mean, they could in free agency. Zach Allen could be a guy that comes over from the Cardinals' previous familiarity with Vance Joseph, who's kind of similar, had similar production to Dre'Mont last season. But you lose out on a guy like that, you are taking a significant risk on maybe taking a step back defensively. And can Denver survive that? I mean, like, I think we saw at the end of the season, like, against the Chargers, against the Chiefs, they're giving up points, but they were also putting up points, right? So it's like that balance. Can you find that balance? Are you okay with knowing, like, hey, the offense is going to have to win you games? Because the narrative for the last 6-7 years has been like, hey, you're going to have to score on defense in order to win games. The defense is going to have to win you the games.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see which way they go. I mean, there are some names out there. If you're looking to, kind of get a veteran to plug the hole, if you do lose a Dre'Mont Jones, Robert Quinn is a free agent, Brandon Graham is a free agent, Yannick Ngakoue is a free agent. I don't think they would be able to afford a Jadeveon Clowney, but he's out there. Larry Ogunjobi's out there. So there's some edge rushers, some names that you can, try to plug in and play. But I think what Dre'Mont Jones brings to this team is vital. And obviously, what do you make of the notion about how he's a little, turned off with the organization after Chubb was traded and losing his Ejiro Evero?
I think he was frustrated, and rightfully so, because Chubb and him were very close. Mm-hmm. Like, he and Bradley Chubb, I mean,
similar age.
Dre'Mont came in a year after Chubb did. And during that year, like 2019,
they're both 26.
Yeah, Chubb tore his ACL, so he didn't get to necessarily play too much with him in 2019. But it's like these guys are so close inside that locker room. Like, they're very good friends, away from the football field. And I think the overall message is, and this is a tough position, like as a general manager, like, and you can apply this to anything in life. Like, sometimes you have to make decisions that from a business standpoint makes sense. From a personal standpoint, it kind of sucks because it makes you seem like you're, a bad guy. And I think that was where George Payton was at. Like, he traded away Bradley Chubb, who he called a core player. He's also called Dre'Mont a core player. And so it's like, for Broncos fans that hear core player and they hear it from George Payton, they're like, well, he said this about other guys before and he's traded them. So what does this ultimately mean? There's a fine line. Like, there's GM speak, but George Payton is in a tough position as the Broncos GM where you have to make some decisions that ultimately are going to sting, but the hope is that it makes you better in the end.
Yeah, no, I think
Sucks. It's hard.
I think it's well said. Danny, what do you think about this situation? Can the Broncos afford to lose to Dre'Mont Jones? Do you think they should franchise tag him, which it doesn't sound like they will, try to negotiate a long-term deal, or do you think they could do fine without him?
I think they should get him a long-term deal. He's shown that he's a very valuable part of the defense, and to a certain extent, there's always roster turnover, but the more guys you can have the same from year to year, the better. Regardless of the coaching staff switching, because that locker room chemistry is so important. So I say try to get that long-term deal done, because if you don't, he's probably walking.
He's a good player.
Very good.
And, it'd be a shame to lose him, especially if there's a deal to be had. And one thing we know is players from a lifestyle perspective, love it out here. Obviously, the organization has been a little up and down, but if I'm Dre'Mont Jones, I'm wanting to see what this team looks like under Sean Payton. It's an exciting time to be a Denver sports fan, Denver sports player. And, what made me realize, just how much these guys love Denver is when we interviewed Shelby Harris down at Radio Row. Did not know that he still lives here in the offseason, or his family still lives out here in general. People want
Manuel
to be
Sanders
in
still lives out here.
Exactly. People want to be here. Peyton Manning's out here a good amount. Troy Tulowitzki, there's a lot of guys that, still float around after their playing days. So I'm curious to see how it shakes out. I do think Dre'Mont Jones, if there's a deal to be had, you go ahead and make the deal, even if you got to give him a little bit more than you would like, because I think he's one of those young guys that can be a core player for you moving forward. And I think to Danny's point, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And we've got a new regime coming in with the Broncos and Sean Payton in the offense, and they're going to reinvent the wheel on that front. Losing a Giro Evero was a painful enough. I think you got to try to preserve the positive play and the positive impact of a Dre'Mont Jones, among others, on the defensive side of the ball.
Yep. I agree.